So, what is up? I guess the first question would be, where have I been? And the answer to that is simply just living life. I've got a lot going on right now between having a family and a full-time job and so on and so forth. And I just haven't had the time, or really, to be honest, desire to continue making videos right now. Um, in fact, the only reason I'm even making this video is because I just happen to have been sick for the past few days, so I've had some time to just sit down and kind of take a break. And I figured I'd take 10, 15 minutes, make a quick video, uh, tell you where I've been, why I probably won't continue to be making videos on a regular basis, and at the same time give you a quick little update on how it's been switching from using nothing but Fujifilm gear to over to Sony for the third time for me. So starting with the first topic at hand, like I said, I've haven't been around making these videos because I just haven't had the time. There's really three factors to that though. One of them will be time, uh, and something I've said on this channel before on previous videos is that I like to take my time. If I'm going to share my thoughts on a piece of gear and how it fits my needs, I like to take my time and make sure that I'm not rushing anything to you. I'm not giving you a 2 or 3 day, 1 week long review, because that's not fair, because that's not really um, indicative of how I would use the gear. And I personally don't feel like it's enough time for me to give my full thoughts on something. To be frank, photography is not my job. It's not what I do full time. And so it takes me a while to get a feel for a lens, because I don't like to force it and shoot images for the sake of sharing my thoughts on a piece of gear. I like to live with it for a while, use it how I would normally use it to capture and document the type of things I like to document, and then share my thoughts on them. So simply put, it takes a while to do that, and I'm in no rush to do so. Which brings me to my second point. The reason why I'm in no rush to do so is because um, YouTube was never, or like, blowing up on YouTube has never been an aspiration of mine. I have no desire to be a full-time YouTuber at all. Um, and the only reason I even make and share these videos is because sometimes I just, have thoughts on the gear and the stuff that I'm using, or philosophy about photography, whatever the case may be. And I felt like rather than keep them to myself, I'd start a conversation and just, engage with other people who are kind of in the same space as me, just share and just be interactive. Really, there's no other reason why I'm making these videos. I'm not doing it to appease anyone. I'm not doing it as a part of some type of career aspirations. So just putting that out there too. That's the second reason why I really haven't made many videos. And the third reason is just because I just haven't felt like it, to be honest. I really don't, feel like uh, there's a much more intricate answer to that. It's just I haven't felt like it. And for that reason, moving forward, just know that I'm not going to be one of these channels that has like, um, regular and steady videos coming out all the time. That's not really this channel. And if you subscribe or join here thinking that that's what you were going to get, I apologize now. Kind of sorry, not sorry. And if that is a problem for you, then I understand fully if you unsubscribe or you move along. Otherwise, for those who don't mind the slower pace and the kind of random topics and videos I'll cover because they're relevant to me, stick around for the ride, and I appreciate you for doing so. So moving on, I don't know when I'll actually post, or if I'll even post and edit this video, or edit and post this video, but in any event, if it's around that time, happy holidays and happy new year, all that good stuff. For me, it's kind of a time to reflect and think about the changes I've made to my kit this year, and if they have positively or negatively impacted my ability to do what I'm trying to do as far as documenting and capturing my family. Now, I will say, you know, I don't know if I've said it here before. I'm pretty sure I have in one of these videos that there's no perfect system, there's no perfect cameras, there's no perfect lenses for the most part. So everything has its pros and cons, and really it's all about, in my opinion, finding um, the equipment that has the pros and cons that best suits your needs, meaning that the pros really benefit you and your use cases, and the cons don't really matter so much to your use case. As such, um, I was just thinking about, how's it been going so far, switching away from Fujifilm again and back to Sony again. My previous setup, I had an X Pro 3 and an XT3. I primarily used the X Pro 3 for more of my, personal enjoyment. That was my everyday camera, so to speak. And if I needed to shoot any kind of video, or you need to use bigger, longer lenses, I'll pull out the XT3, often with a battery grip on it because I have, those big hands. So, um, to replace those, the system I have now, the A9, I see as that my replacement for the XT3, and the A7C will be the replacement for the X Pro 3. From a usability standpoint, one thing I will say about both the A7C and the A9 in comparison to my Fuji cameras, which I did not see coming, would be that I shoot manual mode on these cameras more than I did on the Fuji cameras. And I'm really not, I haven't quite wrapped my head around why that is. Um, I don't know. I don't know if it's because I was used to the, the dials and aperture rings and stuff on the Fuji gear, that I was used to kind of being able to reach out and just change my settings on the fly. And something about having this mode dial often just doesn't sit right with me when I want to change one aspect, or because most times I want to control both, shutter speed and aperture. And I kind of let auto ISO do its thing 90% of the time. And so switching from aperture priority to shutter back to manual has just been kind of a hassle. So most times I just leave both of these cameras on manual, and then I control those elements with the back dials. One thing I've also had to adjust to is that the customization and just number of dials and buttons on the A9 far, outpaces the same options on the A7C, which I'm filming this on right now. And so I've kind of had to make the adjustments to get the custom button mapping as close on the A9 as it is the A7C, just for the sake of muscle memory and being able to switch between both cameras seamlessly. So what that means is, even though I have a back and a front dial on this A9, on the A7C, you only have that back dial. You don't have a front dial. And so, a wheel here, this rotational dial. And so I've had to do things like put the shutter speed on this back dial and put the aperture on the back ring, because that's how I have it set up on the A7C. And I don't want to have to think about that too much as I'm switching interchangeably between these bodies, because often I do that a lot. If I'm somewhere with the purpose of photographing and documenting, I will often use both of these cameras at the exact same time, two different focal lengths. So I'm not having to switch lenses all the time, and I kind of have a wider and more of a mid telephoto lens on. Typically that's my setup. So a 28 and a 55, or a 35 and an 85, or I'll mix and match sometimes a 70 to 180 in there, or a 17 to 28 on the wide end with one of those primes. So kind of allows me to quickly go from wide to capturing the environment and the scene, to getting more detailed or more close-up shots, more personal shots of people and things, without having to switch my lenses constantly. So that's why I kind of like the two body setup that I've carried on from Fuji over to the Sony platform as well. So starting with the A9 in comparison to the XT3, for me, this camera has been a big upgrade in almost every single way, even though I believe it should be older than the XT3, because it's the original A9. Now, in what ways what makes me think that? So the first thing that I didn't think would be a big deal for me, but honestly has me reaching for this camera more often than not, has been that silent shooting in combination with the autofocus. I've never really had a shooting experience quite like this, that's so unobtrusive. And for me, that's very important, because the type of photography that I do, the type of documenting I do, essentially, whether that's for my family, friends, or whatever the case may be, really lends itself to being silent, or at least quiet. And the reason why is because I like to get a lot of candid shots. I like to get shots of people when they aren't posing and looking directly at the camera. I think those are good shots to take too, especially of loved ones and family. But at the same time, I like to kind of document the scene as is, remember it as is, because people aren't constantly posing for you when you're just interacting with them. So, I think of it like this is my philosophy on the type of documenting that I do. If I were to just be in a moment, in a moment with, friends and family, having a good, dinner, sit down, game night, whatever the case may be, and I just sat back and just looked around and started to take it in, started to enjoy, the personalities, the interactions, the relationships that surround you, that is essentially what you're looking at when you're just sitting back and take that in. That's the essence. That's kind of the moments that I want to capture. So that means, like I said earlier, more candid more candid style of photography where you're not really bruising the scene, but at the same time, the vantage point in which you're taking those pictures, it's clear that you're a part of that scene. You're not an outside observer, but you're in the middle of it, looking around. And when you have something that is silent, uh, eventually, when you're in that scene, people start to forget you're even taking pictures because there's no audible feedback. You just kind of always have the camera in your hand, you're interacting, you're in that moment, and you're just capturing. And by the end of the night, nobody even pays attention to it anymore, especially when you capture on the back LCD and you're not constantly putting this up to your eye, giving a visual cue that you're taking a picture. And so at some point, people just think you're holding the camera and you're just capturing all the time. Which is, can be a part, it's a little bit of art and science to be able to do that, and also pay close attention to your composition, framing, getting those moments. But that's just the style that I like to do more often than not. And the ones that my family and loved ones you seem to appreciate more is when they were kind of off guard, didn't even know their picture was being captured. And that can be really tough because, when they're in the middle of dialogue or whatever the case may be, their facial expressions aren't always the most appealing for a photograph. But if you catch just the right moments, it can all work out. So I say all that to say the silent shooting and then just the super reliable autofocus of this camera has made that a little bit easier for me. Can I do that with any other camera? Absolutely. I'm sure I could. But I will say that that's made it easier. And even though other cameras have silent shooting modes, the fast readout of this sensor makes it a little bit more usable in different lighting conditions. Once again, not perfect. There's definitely still lighting conditions in which this will be problematic using a silent shutter with regards to banding and just color cast and things like that. But it opens up that shooting envelope a lot more when you have a faster readout on that sensor. So that's one thing that I feel like has been a big benefit of using the Sony A9 over the X-T3. Other observations, A9 versus X-T3, there's really not much. I will say, of course, the A9 is a little bit heavier, and that's true for the Sony system all the way around, with a few exceptions, is that usually the bodies are, even though sometimes smaller, they're a little bit heavier, partially due to the battery, partially due to the metal construction. Even though Fuji has metal construction too, they seem to use lighter materials in all of their bodies. In comparison, their bodies can feel hollow when you pick it up next to a Sony body. So it's a little heavier. Everything's a little bit bigger on this side. However, what I will say is that the autofocus is, to me, the way I use it, far more capable over here on the Sony side. Fuji's come a long way, but it still doesn't really hold a candle, in my opinion, to what Sony still does, even with this 5-year-old camera here on the A9. And I'll say that and that goes for stills and video autofocus, honestly. And then the low ISO performance is a bit better over here on the full frame side. I couldn't tell you, if I tried to quantify it, I couldn't tell you how much better it is, but it's noticeably better to me. Physics will still be physics. A bigger sensor of a similar generation of sensors will generally do a little bit better in lower light. Not to say the Fujis aren't capable in low light and you can't work with them, but I've just found it a little easier to get certain shots. Like I said, I like to document and take pictures of certain scenes that I'm in for the primary type of photography that I do, without having to bruise the scene. So I don't really like to introduce a lot of off-camera flash and whatnot if I don't need to, or if I can avoid it, really. So yeah, I'd say that the A9, in my opinion, has been, like, I'm surprised how much I've picked this up God, honestly, when I first bought this, I only thought I'd use it for kind of sport shooting or anything I needed the fast motion for, but I find myself reaching for this more often over most of my other options here, because it's just so capable all the way around and it's silent, and that I found it in almost every situation I've been in. That's been a benefit personally. So the A9 has been really fantastic for me and a great value and a bargain. Um, and right now, I think what I'm going to do is switch over to the A7C, or I'll switch over the video to the A9, and so I can hold the A7C and talk about my thoughts on that versus the Fuji platform, because that's where things get a little bit more interesting, and where a little bit of maybe not regret, but things I miss about Fuji kind of come in when I compare it to this body here, A7C. So 1 second, I'll be right back. Let's go ahead and switch that. Here we are with the A7C in hand now. So like I said, I typically would compare this to the X Pro 3 that I moved away from on Fuji. And so how does this compare to that setup? And to be honest, it's kind of been a mixed bag, right? The one thing I've struggled with a lot, and if you watch my first impressions of this camera, you'll know a little bit about this, but the one thing I struggled with the most was the ergonomics of it. And it's something I've been trying to kind of correct, I guess, for lack of a better term, for the past couple of months as I've been using it. One more thing I wanted to cover, because I've gotten comments about this before, about how I talk, or spend a lot of time talking about the ergonomics of a camera, to the point where people thought it was kind of unnecessary how much I covered them. But when it comes to comparing cameras, the reason why I spend so much time on ergonomics and not a whole lot of time on image quality is because most of these sensors and systems are pretty equivalent. Like, there's not a big difference between the sensor quality on a lot of these cameras that I've compared in the past. It's not a big difference to me as far as image quality. Like, it's negligible when you start to get down to it. So I don't spend a whole lot of time talking about that. I do cover it. I mentioned low light performance, dynamic range, things like that. But there's just not a lot in it and the differences. So I tend to talk more about the differences between the platforms as far as the lenses available, accessories available, and then just the usability of it, the everyday holding this thing in your hand and using it as a tool. And that's why I spend a lot of time on the ergonomics and the grip, because for me it's important, right? Like I've said it a million times, I have big, huge hands, and so there's a lot of camera bodies out there that sometimes can just be uncomfortable for me to hold. And no matter how great the image quality is, it's going to be just as good as image quality somewhere else. But if I find it uncomfortable to hold for 2 hours at a time, I'm probably not going to use it very much. So for me, that's why I spend a lot of time talking about ergonomics. So just want to address that, and I'll cut back into whatever I was talking about beforehand. I almost always have to add accessories to cameras that I use to make them more comfortable for me to use long term. So with the A7C, I've gone through a lot of different iterations of this. When I first bought this body used, it came with a what is it called? A small rig cage already attached to it. And it was the first version of that that cage, the full cage, and I wasn't a huge fan of it. It was functional, sure, but as far as using it as a grip, it didn't add anything to the actual grip. It did give you a little somewhere for your pinky to go, but it was a little too extended for me, because it had to be a little wider to accommodate the battery door opening. So I wasn't really a fan of that. I noticed that the small rig had put out a newer grip. So I did end up ordering that because I heard it was way, way, way better. I also had ordered this grip here from AliExpress, and you can find the same thing on Etsy and whatnot. A little overpriced, if anything, but it's a little wooden grip that also has a little base plate with Arca Swiss rails on it as well. Still gives you access to the battery by opening this little metal ring, and then the battery door swings open. And so it's a pretty nice looking setup on paper, but as I mentioned in my first impressions of this camera, I really just don't like the angle in which the the wooden handle on this goes, because it pushes your fingers more towards the lens instead of away from the lens, to give your hands more room to breathe. Because if you've used Sony, you know that they really place their mount super close to the grip, and so with the bigger, fatter GM lenses especially, there's no room for your fingers to go. And that's really problematic for bigger lenses. I don't really have too many big lenses, but the fattest one being the 85mm 1.8, and depending on the grip I have on there, it could cause some issues for me on this camera. So I won't belabor that point too much, but you know, I have a couple of grips, and I think I have the small rig one right here. One thing I will say about this small rig cage right here, this is a newer version that has an integrated like rubberized grip built in. This thing is super duper comfortable. I mean, this is one of the most comfortable setups I've held on to with regards to holding a camera. You know, coming from someone who's used a lot of DSLRs, that's saying something, but this grip is phenomenally comfortable. The only thing I don't like about this cage is that, I mean, it's really just the fact that it's a cage, and it makes the camera way bigger than I feel like it needs to be. So I had this on for a while because it's the most comfortable thing out there, and it handled all my lenses on this camera beautifully. But the issue was when I would set my cameras down on the table and have my A9 with that extender on it, and then the A7C with this cage on it. The A7C was bigger than my A9, and I was like, with the hump, and I was like, that doesn't make much sense. This is supposed to be the small, light, most compact full frame body Sony's made, yet I've made it bigger than like their standard size, you know, more SLR styled body. So it just really didn't make sense to me. So I went back to trying out different setups to try to make this camera, keep it small, compact, light, but still ergonomically sound, which is something that the Fuji X Pro 3 with the hand grip on it was just perfect for me. I mean, it was fantastic. So I went back on my search to try to find that same middle ground of all those things. So I went back to this wooden grip, and one thing that really helped with the handling of this wooden grip that I didn't like so much before was putting on this thumb grip on the camera, which I'm no stranger to thumb grips. I've used them on my Fuji cameras. Almost, actually, like every single Fuji camera I've had, I've used a thumb grip on. I've used them on Leicas and other cameras like that. So I was no stranger to that, and I was able to find one that was also, you know, silver color. It doesn't really match the finish of the A7C here, but it's close enough that it doesn't bother me. And that has taken me from being, you know, having to curl my fingers into this grip and potentially press them against the barrel of the lens, which is uncomfortable, to it allows me to adjust my grip by putting some of my leverage on that back thumb part, which then allows me to just grip the camera on the front of the grip and not curl in like that. See the difference there? Because I can squeeze from both sides. I got the thumb grip and this, and there we go. Now, the challenge that presents was I use, on Sony at least, on Fuji I didn't use this so much, but on Sony I use back button focus like I used to with DSLRs, because it's kind of convenient to be able to focus and recompose, or focus and then kind of lock it there and take your images. I enjoy it that way. So that could be problematic when you have to hold on to a thumb grip on the back instead of being able to push the button. But as you may be able to see, maybe or may not this video, I'm not sure, it's not a problem for me with this thumb grip because of where it puts your thumb. It puts it for me right above the AF on button, and my hands are big enough that I can press both at the same time. So I'm holding on to this, and I just rock my thumb down a little bit, and I'm now auto-focusing, so on and so forth. So all that to say, the combination of this wooden grip and this thumb grip has made this a much more usable platform for me. But it's just sad that it took me so long to arrive here, and even so, it's still not as comfortable, not by a long shot, as my X Pro 3 setup I had. It's heavier, it's a little more cumbersome, and yeah, it's just not as comfortable really as that setup. The one thing I do miss a lot from the Fuji platform would be the fact that I can't just look at my camera when it's off and see all the settings and know where I'm at. I did appreciate that on the Fuji, because I could tell when I would leave one environment and go into another, I could look down and see if I did need to actually adjust anything. Like if I was going into a darker place, maybe I need to take control of that shutter speed and kind of dial it down to, you know, kind of that 1:1 ratio to try to get as much light gathering as possible while not introducing any kind of shake. So I like being able to look at that and know where I was at before, and the fact that I more often than not keep this back LCD closed on this particular camera means that to see those same settings, I have to either look through the viewfinder with the camera on and see them in there, or actually turn this LCD around and do the same thing. So it's kind of a hassle to check my settings before I shoot on this as compared to Fuji. So that's one thing I do miss. I don't think that the A7C is as much of a personal fun replacement as the X Pro 3 was. I just enjoy shooting the X Pro 3 more than I do this camera, even though I enjoy the results from this camera more. And if I could go back and do it again, I bought this camera for $1,500 used. I had no plans of picking up this A9 that I'm filming on now. But when I did pick up the A9, I got that for $1,700 used. And I do think that, like I said, I reached for the A9 probably more than I do for this. And if I could go back and do it again, I probably would not have bought the A7C, even used. I would have bought this A9 used for $1,700, and then I would have put some more funds towards getting a used A7R4 more likely, because you can find those. The lowest I've seen them typically more than once, I've seen it around 2,200 used. I would have picked one of those up with the 61 megapixels, just for the flexibility. One thing I found myself doing more recently is I've been wanting to shoot. I've wanted my photos to feel more like screen caps from a movie, and so I've been playing around with the aspect ratios in that regard. You know, something having, if though, for those who know about the Texas Leica, both the Hasselblad and the Fuji film cameras that can take 35 mil film and shoot, you know, kind of combines to and gives you that ultra wide aspect ratio, kind of CinemaScope looking aspect ratio. I really enjoy that aspect ratio in that platform. I've never really cropped my images to do that, but I've started to do that more recently, and having 61 megapixels to play with in that space, I think would have been nice. Also, even when I was shooting sports in the A9, I don't have a ton of glass. The longest glass I have would be the Tamron 70-180, and sometimes I needed a little bit more reach, but I also did not want to pick up a whole nother lens. I don't want to buy 100-400. It's not that serious for me. I don't use those long lenses too often, but it would be nice to get a little bit more reach. And I feel like if I could use the A7R4 in that situation with the 61 megapixels, I could crop down to an APS-C size frame and still get plenty of detail with that, still get a high resolution. So not that you need it for those type of shots, but I don't know, it's something about having that type of resolution available to you that, you know, it's just appealing to me. Not that I want it to be my everyday camera, because that's impractical, but when I want the resolution, it would be nice to have an option I can reach for and get that while also using all the same lenses I use on this platform. So for me, the A7R4 for $2,200 is a bargain, I think, for that. Anyways, that'll probably get cut out the video. I just want to give you guys a few updates on where I've been, what I've been doing, and how this has been going. And so hopefully that's interesting to somebody out there. I don't think it's very interesting, but yeah, I had a little bit of free time, thought I'd make a video, share my thoughts with you, and see you know, what your thoughts on any of this are. So anyways, I'll see you guys down in the comment section. Until next time, I appreciate you making it to this point in the video. Peace.